صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and welcome to another week of the Barakah programs. Inshallah, this week we'll have another great program lined up for you all. And for once, we won't be having pizza at the end, Barakah returning to its roots, inshallah, but we'll get to that at the end. But to begin with, we'll be having Brother Yahya reading Surah Al-Rahman for us. So can we please welcome him with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا القسط ولا تخسروا الميزان والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار وخلق الجان من مارج من نار فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان رب المشرق بأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان مرج لا يبغيان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان يخرج منهما اللؤلؤ والمرجان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان وله الجوار المنشآت في البحر كالأعلام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان كل من عليها فان ويبقى وجه ربك ذو الجلال والإكرام فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Thank you, Brother Ali, for that beautiful Quran recitation. Now, inshallah, to be continuing with the theme of nature, which is present in Surah Al-Rahman, we'll be having a speech from our brother Nicholas on nature and contemplation. So can we please welcome him with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for coming tonight. Despite the weather, that's why I'm wearing my bronze jacket here. So thank you very much for coming. So today, inshallah, we'll be talking about Islam, nature, and contemplation. I start with the usual disclaimer now. The first one is that I encourage you to do your own research. This is just my own. This is just my own. Okay, cool. So I'm saying, first disclaimer, as usual, is I really encourage you to do your own research. This is just me talking here. I don't present this as being the most complete, the most perfect, or the best analysis of this particular topic. So really, I encourage you to do your own research on the topic. Although, unfortunately, I think that I don't think it would take you very long because there's not much written, unfortunately, by Muslim scholars on this particular topic. And the second one is always good when you talk in public about this type of topics to explain kind of where you come from. So the 4 sources of information which I use for this, or sources of inspiration, one is Natural Balagha, which is after the Quran the first Islamic book I've ever read, and also the reason why I'm Muslim nowadays, alhamdulillah. The second one is lectured by Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, the Dean of the Islamic Muslim College. The third one is basically my own experiences on the spiritual journey. And the fourth one is my research in political economy and political theory, which is really my area of expertise. So here there will be 2 dimensions to the talk. We're going to start from the more theological, the more mystical dimension, and we slowly move to more like social, ethical, political issues. But there's really a connection between the 2. So basically I'm going to try to give you also some practical dimension to this talk. It's not just about theory. That would be the more social dimension or ethical dimension. So, I start by saying there's something different with Islam. Here we live in a country which I guess most people are atheists, but or Christian, it's probably half and half. But most of the people who come from a Christian background, they have different belief systems. And here I really want to emphasize the fact that Islam is different because it asks you to move really from belief to understanding and realization. It asks you to basically not just have blind faith, this is written in the Quran or this is written in the Bible, therefore you need to believe. It really emphasizes the importance of certitude. The second one is that we don't believe that God is, far away in the sky somewhere or something like that. We believe that God is closer to us than a jugular vein. Right? And for people here who believe type of thing, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that we do need to realize that in Islam, closeness to God is something important. We can go, pray, and talk directly to God. We don't need to go through the clergy or something like that. We can talk directly to God. God is closer to us than our jugular vein. And then finally, there's also the fact that in Islam, the world is not fallen, the world is beautiful, the world is sacred. And therefore, it is a sign for us to meditate and to think about as much as we can. So, if Islam is all about a spiritual journey, taking us on a path, the whole idea of suluk, if you want to be a tzaddik, if you want to walk on that path, you want to move towards certainty and closeness to God, you can ask, basically, where do I start? So where can you start? Basically, it's by contemplating nature. And thank you to Brother Mohammed, not here this week, but last week, 2 weeks ago, he gave me a great segue here because he was talking about how do we actually know God, and he was emphasizing at the end of the lecture the contemplation of nature as a way for us to go close to God. So here we've got two different ayat from the Quran. I will spare you the Arabic with a French accent. So I'll say the first one, and to Allah belongs the east and the west. So wherever you turn, there's the face of Allah. Indeed, Allah is all-encompassing knowing. That's the first ayat. I could have made a very long list of ayats, there's no point going through all of them, but there are a lot of ayats like this in the Quran. The second one is very interesting. We will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves, until it becomes clear to them that this is the truth. But is it not sufficient concerning your Lord that He is over all things a witness? And here I really want you to focus on the first sentence of that ayah, the idea that we have signs on the horizons, so it's really looking out, looking at the creation of God, looking at nature, and you have signs within yourself. And there's really a strong connection between the two. And most people start from the creation and then they turn inward. So it's contemplating on nature and then contemplating on your own self. So there's a really strong dimension of contemplation and the relationship between the external world and the internal world. And when you get into a spiritual journey, you discover that the external world is just there to, as a first step, to move inward. And again, there's that idea that you need to do that until you reach certainty that this is the truth, al-haq. So reflection on nature is all over the place in the Quran, in our scripture. So it's quite different from other world scriptures where the Quran basically, and here talk about natural balagha as well, basically talks about astronomy, talks about biology, and biology talks about embryology. It's kind of strange to describe how the fetus is formed, these kind of things. Zoology, botany, and it's all about the celebration of life and beauty. And you've got, for example, in terms of zoology, if you go to natural balagha, you've got talking about the bat, talking about ants. Again, it's not something which is very common in world scriptures, but which is, again, showing that Islam is really strongly emphasizing the importance of thinking about nature, about the beauty of creation. But it's not really just about the scriptures, right? It's not just an intellectual thing, it's also a practical thing. The way Islam started, basically, is Prophet Muhammad ﷺ going to mountains as a time of retreat at night, and that's how everything in Islam started. Islam is not just, it's interesting that he didn't receive revelation walking in the bazaar, like doing shopping or something like that. It's better. So I was saying that Islam, it's not just about the scriptures, it's also a practical way of life. And the way Islam started was with Prophet Muhammad ﷺ going to a cave in the mountains. And you've got here a picture of that particular mountain. I really want you to try to picture this. I don't know if any of you has ever spent time in nature at night alone, but it's both magical and beautiful. You can look at the sky and see the stars and things like that. It's also a bit scary. It's also a bit scary. So it's really that dimension of being amazed by the beauty of the creation, but also realizing your own vulnerability. Realizing that basically anything could happen right now. It feels kind of, even if you go to a place which is kind of safe, you kind of feel a bit scared. It feels a bit like dangerous, even if it's probably not. This is actually a very ancient practice. It's not just in Islam, like it's all over different indigenous tribes. They have these types of rites of passage, that idea of initiation. And for Sufis, you've got that idea of halwa, where you just basically go for 40 days, like you stay in the cell, where you just contemplate and these kind of things. So So something which is very universal type of practice, going alone and really contemplating on the world and then turning in the world. It's even in the cinema, I don't know if any of you are like Star Wars, but basically Luke Skywalker going in the swamp and going in a dark cave and facing his arch enemy. So even in cinema, before Disney kind of ruined the franchise, well, it's also there in the cinema. So it's really something universal in literature, everything, that idea that you need to go out in the world, be alone, look at the world, and then turn inside. And that relates to the fact that this is something which is inside us. It's part of the Arabic word, your fitra, right? And Islam is all about reconnecting ourselves to our inner nature. Another thing which is quite interesting about Islam is that our practices have remained the same for 14 centuries. I don't know many other religions which can claim the same. So the way we pray, yeah, different madhab have very small differences between the way we pray, but it's basically it has stayed the same for 40 centuries. So it's very, very ancient what we're doing on a daily basis. Our daily life is governed by the different, the moon for Ramadan. I know that sometimes, unfortunately, we have debates about, when we should stop fasting, these kind of things. But the moon is really what is guiding us in terms of when we decide when we start and when we finish fasting. When we pray, it's also, based on the sun. So it's really trying to reconnect us to these ancient practices as well. Fasting, also very ancient practice. That's something which basically human beings have been used for a very long time as well, because in the past there was no fridge or anything like that, so sometimes you had to stay for a while without water, without eating, these kind of things. So again, it's something which is really part of nature, something which is really hardwired in us. And this is why when we practice Islam, it feels good. Yeah, during Ramadan we get hungry and things like that, but we feel there's something right about this, right? This is because it's reconnecting us to our inner nature. However, our current society is not really helping us so much to reconnect to that internal nature. We suffer from what you could call a nature deficit disorder, a sense of alienation. Alienation is that idea that you're not really yourself. And it's really no wonder that so many people now are distracted. And when you're distracted from creation and from yourself, you're distracted from God. For example, if you live in, let's say, Brunswick, and you work in the CBD, you can spend your whole day, like, get up, check through your phone for like 15 minutes, take a quick shower, maybe have breakfast, then go on tram, and you stay in the tram, and then you go to an office and you enter a number in a spreadsheet for 8 hours a day, go back on the same tram, go back home, watch TV. You spend the whole day, you haven't seen you haven't looked at the sky, you haven't seen anything alive for your whole day. And unfortunately, I think that's what most people experience on a day-to-day basis. The fact that you have that picture there, sorry. We've got a picture there which shows like a big issue as well is light pollution. So I was talking about how great it is to go out at night and look at the stars. Alhamdulillah, here it's a good place, a new place, you can actually do that. But if you live closer to a city, because of light pollution, you can't actually see the stars very much. And maybe that's one of the reasons why there's so much atheism nowadays, because I remember as a kid, I was not a believer, but I remember I was 10 years old or something like that, like lying in the grass with a friend at night and looking at the stars. And even if you're an unbeliever, you still have some kind of metaphysical discussion about the meaning of life and these kind of things. So maybe there's a parallel there. Fireflies, for example. Please raise your hand if you have ever seen fireflies, so not in a Disney movie or something like that, in nature. 1, 2, okay. That's just sad. It's not your fault because of pesticide and things like that. They're actually dying a lot. But that's some kind of magical experience which we don't experience very often, unfortunately. So again, maybe that's the reason why there's so much atheism. You can't really see the beauty of God. But it's definitely a reason why there's so much depression. I know some of you here study psychology, these kind of things. That idea of a deficit syndrome, that idea is like actually something which some people, for example, in jail, they're trying to rehabilitate inmates by putting them like working together in garden, putting them in touch with animals and this kind of thing, because it actually improves people's behaviors. There's a website called research.childrenandnature.org, which basically summarizes and compiles all different academic research on the relationship between nature and mental health, which is quite interesting. So it's proper academic research, not like some kind of hippie website about noise. Good research. So I think this is why it's important for Muslims to turn back to nature. I will read a quote from the book, which we will read at the book club. So that's by Sheikh Abdul Hakim, Traveling Home. The city dweller's perception of ubiquitous ugliness hardens the heart, which in turn renders the perception of beauty more difficult, creating a psychological trap or a vicious circle. Beauty is hardly to be found in a laptop or iPhone. It is to be intuited in the heart by confronting it personally, ideally in virgin nature, as the Quran recommends. The urbanization of the world and the desolation even of traditional cities, symbolized in its most extreme form by the doomsday clock in Mecca. I know I have a brother in Mecca right now, so you can tell us about it when it comes back. Cuts the soul off from this healing. So, I can't read the whole page, but the whole page is actually quite interesting. So, even for Muslims, it's very important then to reconnect to nature. Even when you go to Mecca, I haven't been there, but it's pretty artificial, which is quite problematic if we think that actually contemplating nature helps us to get closer to God. There's also the animal kingdom. So Islam is not like, for example, René Descartes, the philosopher, he used to believe that animals were like machines. So if you start digging in the brain of a monkey and the monkey is screaming, that's just like if you, I don't know, use a screw into a clock, it makes noises, the metal, things like that. So you've got that idea that animals are just machines, which may explain the way animals have been treated quite badly in the West for a long time. But here you've got the opposite in the Quran. The Quran actually tells us that animals are actually communities like us. Use the word ummah, plural actually, ummah. And there's no creature on the earth or bird that flies with its wings, except that they are communities like you. They have not neglected in the register a thing. Then unto their Lord they will be gathered. So they're not just things that just are pretty and then die and then just rot there. They're actually a form of community as well. They have their own way of worshipping. And this actually has very strong ethical implication for us as Muslims, I would say. So the issues of like deforestation, meat and dairy consumption, all of these kinds are actually something which we need to think about. When you look at modern chicken farms, for example, even the halal ones, halal, so it looks like concentration camp for animals, basically, for other communities. And I don't think that as Muslims we should think that this is acceptable. So maybe you can share it after, but it's actually like, it is possible to get organic, grass-fed meat. It's a bit more expensive, but then again, we don't eat too much meat anyway. It's called Cherry Farm Organic. I don't receive money from them. I'm not just saying it's to do. They're not a sponsor. But if you want, we can send the link later if you want to make your halal meat consumption maybe more ethical. So there's a recognition in the Quran that biodiversity is a good thing, right? Animals do suffer, and they are all ayat, they're all signs of God. However, there's a current biodiversity crisis. I'll just read here. So some facts. Unfortunately, the list could have taken the whole night to just go through the list. The world has seen an average 68 drop in mammals, bird, fish, reptile, and amphibian population since 1970. In 1930, as many as 10 million wild elephants roamed huge swaths of the African continent. Today, there are just 415,000 elephants across Africa. Fewer than 600 Sumatran tigers are estimated to remain in the wild. The koala population dropped a reported 30% from 2018 to 2021. More than 40% of insect species are declining, and a third are endangered. The rate of extinction is 8 times faster than that of mammals, birds, and reptiles. The total mass of insects is falling by a precipitous 2.5% a year, according to the best data available, suggesting they could vanish within a century. This is actually quite important because insects are not just ayat of God, they're not just things which sometimes we want to squish when they're inside our houses and things like that. They're actually important for like pollination. They go from plant to plant, and that's how like we get fruits and things like that. If we don't have bees anymore, and by the way, there's bees is very important in the Quran, we're quite in trouble in terms of food supply and this kind of things. So when you think about pesticides and these kind of things, it has very strong ethical implications again. So really what I want people to realize is that the loss of biodiversity is almost like a sacrilege. It's not okay, because the Quran tells us that we need to look at all these signs, all these amazing creatures. So if all of these creatures die, it's just not great. Even you don't need to be Muslim to think that, but from a Muslim perspective, it's not great. So why is this happening? Well, basically, the main reason why this is happening is because of consumerism. So consumerism is the main reason why there's such an environmental threat. Here, so on the slide, you've got Earth Overshoot Day. So it's the basically you start using all the resources on the Earth which cannot be replaced. I guess if the scientist was here, he would say that's a very basic explanation, but you get it. You can see there's a bit of a jump here. I guess it's because of COVID 2 years ago. But basically, every single year, that day comes closer and closer and closer. And that's definitely a big issue, and that's why there's problems like climate change and the fact that there's such a decline in biodiversity, which again is problematic. So there's a relationship between and the current environmental threat, and the current environmental threat is a problem from an Islamic perspective because of all the reasons which I've mentioned earlier. What does Islam say, however, about consumerism? So I read one ayat from the Quran, and I read something from Najul Balagha. So in the Quran, so that's Surah Al-Hadid, verse 20. Know that the life of this world is but amusement and diversion and adornment, and boasting to one another, and competition and increase of wealth and children. And there's a book there which is really interesting, which shows that people, if they can choose between having more money but it's equal, or they have less money but they have more than the others, they actually choose. There's a study which was made at Harvard University. They prefer to have less money, but if it's still more than the others, they still prefer that. So it's related to this ayat. So increase in wealth and children, like the example of a rain whose resulting plant growth, I won't read the rest, but the first part you get it. There's also in Surah Al-Fajr, verse 20. Actually, it's through the whole surah. You've got on one hand the idea that you love wealth with great love at the beginning of the surah, and that's kind of opposed to the idea of inner peace, so nafsul mutma'ina. So you've got really a strong tension, and that's linking back to mental health, between consumerism and inner peace. In Najul Balagha, I read, for example, there's one about all the different prophets. So, for example, the example of Prophet Isa, alayhi salam. If you desire, as Imam Ali, alayhi salam, talking, if you desire, I will tell you about Isa, alayhi salam, son of Maryam, alayhi salam. And he used a stone for his pillow, put on coarse clothes, and ate rough food. His condiment was hunger. His lamp at night was the moon. His shade during the winter was just the expanse of earth eastward and westward. His fruits and flowers were only what grows from the earth for the cattle. He had no wife to allure him, nor any son to give grief. No wealth to deviate his attention, nor greed to disgrace him. His 2 feet were his convenience, and his 2 hands his servants. And then there's something about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the fact that he was basically repairing his own clothes, repairing his own sandals. And just a quote as well from the introduction to Najul Balagha. There you go. So here it's an introduction to Najul Balaha, so it's Ayatollah Muqtada Motahari here. Imam Ali alayhi salam, the most free of all the world's free men. He was a free man in the complete sense of the word, because he was a zahid, so it's like someone who, asceticism, I think is the word for zahid in English, in the most profound sense of the word. Ali alayhi salam, in Najul Balaha, there's great emphasis on renunciation of world pleasures and comforts as a means of liberation. In one of the hikam, he says the following, quote, "Greed is everlasting slavery." So, we see that consumerism is quite a big issue, both from an ethical, environmental perspective, but also it's a problem from a mental health perspective. And now we just have these things, and of course, Islam is about balance. I'm not telling you that you should go sell your house and your car and go live in a cave somewhere in the Denton Ranges, something like that. It's all about balance, but I think we need, all of us, to look at ourselves in the mirror and try to see if we got that balance right, I guess. So, I was talking about consumerism. What you need to understand is that most of the choices you make as a consumer are not free choices. You got people who are hired and get pretty good salaries to make you buy stuff. They study, the way your brain works, the neurochemicals, like dopamine and stuff like that, to make you buy stuff. So whatever you do, whatever you buy, unless it's like the basic essentials, usually it's not, you don't do that out of your free will, as you might think. So I read something. It comes from a book. It's called The Coming Insurrection, by the Invisible Committee. And it's going to show you that consumerism is a high problem in terms of reconnecting to your fitra, to your inner nature. So I'm quoting here. "I am what I am. This is marketing's latest offering to the world. The final stage in development of advertising. Far beyond all the exhortation to be different, to be oneself and to drink Pepsi. Decades of concept in order to get where we are, to arrive at pure tautology, I equal I. I am what I am. My body belongs to me. I am me, you are you, and something's wrong. Mass personalization, individualization of all conditions, life, work, and misery. Diffuse schizophrenia, rampant depression, atomization into fine paranoid particles, hysterization of contact. The more I want to be me, the more I feel an emptiness. The more I express myself, the more I'm drained. The more I run after myself, the more tired I get. We treat ourselves like boring box office. We've become our own representatives in a strange commerce, guarantors of a personalization that feels, in the end, a lot more like an amputation. Meanwhile, I manage the quest for a self, my blog, my apartment, the latest fashionable stuff, I'm changing the word here, relationship dramas, whatever prosthesis it takes to hold on to an I. If society hadn't become such a definitive abstraction, then it would denote all the existential crutches that allow me to keep dragging on, the ensemble of dependencies I've contracted as a price of my identity. I am what I am. Never has domination found such an innocent-sounding slogan, the maintenance of the self in a permanent state of deterioration, in a chronic state of near collapse. It's the best-kept secret of the present order of things. The weak, depressed, self-critical, virtual self is essentially that endlessly adaptable subject required by the ceaseless innovation of production, the accelerated obsolescence of technologies, the constant overturning of social norms, and generalized flexibility. It is at the same time the most voracious consumer and, paradoxically, the most productive self, the one that will most eagerly and energetically throw itself into the slightest project, only to turn later to its original larval state. It's dizzying to see Reebok's I am what I am and thrown on the top of Shanghai skyscraper. The West everywhere rolls out its favorite Trojan horse, the exasperating antinomy between the self and the world, the individual and the group, between attachment and freedom. I am what I am then is not simply a lie, a simple advertising campaign, but a military campaign. A war cry directed against everything that exists between beings, against everything that circulates indistinctly, everything that invisibly links them, everything that prevents complete desolation, against everything that makes us exist, and ensures that the whole world doesn't everywhere have the look and feel of a highway, an amusement park, or new town. Pure boredom, passionless but well-ordered, empty, frozen space, where nothing moves apart from registered bodies, molecular automobiles, and ideal commodities. So the reason why I've read this rather long part of the text is because basically I am what I am. This ideology is the opposite of the Islamic ethos. In Islam, it's not I am what I am, I do whatever I want. In Islam, it's the whole purpose is actually to get rid of that. However, advertising, social media to a large extent nowadays, is all about the celebration of the self. Everything you buy is to give you like an identity. And Islam is it's not about celebrating the self, it's all about actually going away from the self, to nafs. And as I said, the current ideology, what you buy and things like that reinforces your self. And so you can think about this whenever you are going to a shopping mall or something like that. Try to really emphasize the fact that this is not trying to drive you back to God at all. It's trying to take you away from God. And what's really interesting about all of this is that a lot of people in the West actually realize that there's something really wrong with the current society. People don't really feel happy spending hours in a shopping mall, spending hours in front of a computer every day. People do feel that sense of alienation. Right? That's why there's so much problem with people. I know that Muslims like to complain about how hard it is to live in the West, but it's hard for people in the West, Western people, to live in the West as well. It's not easy. There's so many problems. People are not sure about their identity, people are not sure about genders, people are not sure about anything. They just spend hours on the phone and things like that. And that's why some people, they try to reconnect to nature, and that's why it's really interesting that there's quite a growth in Western culture to go back to neo-pagan, so it's like neo-paganism. So this is like the Beltane festival. I think it's in Scotland, or Ireland, but I think it's Scotland. And basically it's people in spring celebrating nature and things like that. And that's one big one. The one is what we could call like Western Buddhism. So it's like people, going, walking like 10 hours a day as traders in Wall Street, and then going for a Zen class after that, and buying Lululemon clothing, going on the yoga mat, and thinking that they're going to find peace at the same time. And then on the Friday evening, they're still going to go see their shrink and spend like $150 or I don't know how much it costs, $200 to talk about how bad they feel. So it's just that because all of these things, they're not real. Neo-paganism and Western Buddhism, Buddhism as such is quite an interesting path, but like, that Western approach to Buddhism, which is all about, again, celebrating the self. That's why it doesn't work, basically. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people turn towards this type of things because us as Muslims, we're not very good at talking about our faith. We're not really good at showing everything which we're talking about. Yes, we have an answer to consumerism. Yes, we have an answer to mental health issues. Yes, we have an answer to climate change and environmental destruction and now so yeah, we shouldn't be seen as people just focus on, I don't know, let's say something not too controversial, like which part of a woman's feet can be seen on public and debate about that. We should be seen as people who actually go out there, go in the world, show that our faith is like actually a way of saving humanity. And that's why unfortunately we don't do that very well, because people turn to weird torch burning type of faith nowadays. And it's also like there's a problem is that as Muslims, we're not very good at engaging with Western thought. we're not very good at engaging with political economy. So there's Mohammed Bakr Sadr, for example, he wrote a really interesting book about our economy, so the idea that there's such a thing as Islamic economy. However, it's quite dated, no? It's really emphasizing like focusing on capitalism versus communism, and we've kind of moved past that now. Not really good. If we actually have a look at an Islamic perspective on political economy, there's two things which are worth mentioning. The first one is the degrowth movement. So it's the idea that we should stop thinking about the GDP as the thing which we need to increase each year for improving the well-being of our people. So degrowth is the idea that actually we will be much happier if we work 3 days a week instead of 5, even if that means consuming less. That's one aspect. And then there's Georgism as well. If you want to read Progress in Poverty, which is all about the tax system and how basically we should really be not taxing people on their income and their consumption, but taxing natural resources and land instead. So again, because we're not very good at this, there's actually a very strong link between political economy, Western political economy, and Muslims, again, because of our tax system and things like that. We have something interesting to say to make sure that things are fairer and better for the environment, at least. So, I'm kind of running out of time, so what does this mean? I said there will be some kind of practical thing at the end. Well, it means that we kind of, I mean, unless, if everything I just said made sense for you for a very long time and you actually spend a lot of time in nature and things like that, please come and see me after the lecture. I'm sure we'll get along well. But I think for most of us, we really need to review our lifestyle. We need to review the way we approach Islam. We need to revive that tradition of tafakkur, of like contemplation, and try to see the world with different eyes. What does it mean in practice? I don't know. You can, instead of hanging with your mate at Starbucks or something like that, you can just go and sit in a park. You're gonna save money actually, but again, it's not something which is really encouraged. You can make sure that maybe we spend more time in nature even for praying. Okay, nothing wrong with praying in the park. We've done that actually with an English program not long ago. So pray in nature. If you have a balcony, pray on your balcony. Look actually at the sky at night before your Maghrib or Isha prayer. It's really amazing. Maybe rethink the way you consume. Maybe when you buy something, think about how much it costs and think, okay, so I make this much an hour. Could I spend these hours with, I don't know, my kids, or spending time in nature, or maybe doing some extra prayer? So try thinking that way as well when you consume and when you buy things. Understand that in many cases, and again, I'm not talking about your food and clothing and stuff like that, but in a lot of cases, what we buy is not really, doesn't make us happier. And that's, again, don't have time to read a quote, but there's this book, The Hacking of the American Mind, the science behind the corporate takeover of our bodies and brains, which, if you're interested, read that and you see that it's basically people manipulating you and doesn't make you happy. And there's actually a correlation, it's really interesting, which shows that people, this is in US dollars, you make, like, basically your happiness increase until you make $75,000, and it starts decreasing. It's US dollars, so maybe it's here, it would be, the exchange rate, 110 or something like that. And then it starts decreasing. And when you have a look at, like, you've got different indices, so you've got the GDP, that's the mainstream one, but you have indices of happiness. It shows that countries such as Venezuela, for example, which is not great economically, people are much happier than, say, like Japan, which has super high rates of suicide and things like that. Which shows that really things does not really bring happiness at all. There's really a strong difference between pleasure and happiness, let's say. So yeah, really try to approach Islam in a different manner. Try to feel closer to God. Try to be happy also in your Islam. It's also about being happy, all of these kind of things. And means, again, maybe, I know that there's such thing as halal KFC, but have a look at what happens in factory farming, and then make your own educated choices, I guess. So yeah, make sure that you don't spend too much time shopping malls and things like that. It's just not good for you. It's not going to get you closer to God. And if we do this, if we make all of these changes, and we all on it's all about suluk, about that travel towards God. We get closer to nature. we engage with Western philosophy, we understand the evils of this society, which is all about the I, the self, buy more stuff that you can post on Instagram and people can give you more likes and things like that. Doesn't make you happier. Well, Muslims will have a much better way of interacting with non-Muslims. We can talk about Muslims, and that's in the book which we read as well, Muslims as therapists. Muslims as showing the light of our deen. I know deen is not a boring thing that when you pray 5 times a day and things like that. No, it's great. It should make you happy. It should make you happy. You should feel free. It gives you a compass in society. It gives, as I said, it gives solution to so many problems in this current society. And go talk to people who are not Muslim and talk about these things. Talk about how you actually care about animals because it's in the Quran and things like that. And talk about all these things. Don't say, oh, I'm Muslim and I read this in the Quran. Just try to approach this in a universal manner. So yeah, as I said, it's kind of hard to live in the West, I guess, for some Muslims, but maybe we can perceive ourselves actually as people who have been thrown or cast or grown up in the West to actually help society, help people. So it's just trying to revise our role and see how we can actually help society. And that's it for me today, exactly 40 minutes, as I said. Literature on the topic, as I said, unfortunately, not much written. There's a cool documentary, because I know it's a lot of young people, they don't like reading, so it's probably easier, but there's a documentary, it's called The Century of the Self by Adam Curtis, which shows how Bernays, so it was Freud's nephew, basically used the theory, like psychology and things like that, to make people buy stuff. Like, I won't give details, but the way people started smoking, for example, is pretty crazy. So yeah, we've got a whole bunch of books, again, not many from Muslim scholars, because unfortunately it's not something is discussed very often by Muslims. So thank you very much for coming. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Thank you, Brother Nicholas, for that very insightful talk on nature and contemplation in Islam. Inshallah, we'll be able to reflect, as you mentioned, on our daily activities, with how we interact with nature, and then again, of course, consumerism, so that we can gain closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just a couple of announcements before our interactive segment. First of all, again, with Brother Nicholas, we'll be starting the book club in approximately 2.5 weeks. And there's still a few days where people can register for that, so if you're interested with that, you can either talk to Brother Nicholas on the men's side or Fatima Zaghaib on the women's side. And yeah, if you're interested in that, have a chat to them. And the only other thing is there's a small white Suzuki parked outside with the number plate 1UM2RS. Your lights are on, so don't want your battery to die on the way home. So if you want to go address that, that'd be good. Other than that, I'd like to introduce Fatima Zaghaib and Sarah Saleh to begin our interactive segment with Adad Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Salam everyone. Just before the interactive segment, we're just going to have a recitation of a poem by me. So we'll just commence that now. Salawat. The passage of time. You know that you are drowning when your dreams mix with your reality. When you realize your memories aren't real, but they are just a figment your brain created of the reality that you have experienced. The absence of past and the anticipation of the future seems to blind us from the present. From the fact that we are a constant in the passage of time. That we can never hold on to anything that took place in our lives, but only the feeling it brings within us. You begin to hold the present close when you find that some people are no longer there, as they choose to dwell in the past or guess the future. Both do not enrich circumstances or fulfillment that is desired. The realm in which most humans live is the one of loud chatter that clutters your skull and intoxicates your thoughts, with poison that prayer is designed to wring out. In the depths of your paths, you will find orchids that bloom in your valves, with petals that well up to your throat and vines that restrict your lungs. Your words will run dry as you have no oxygen to speak. Where then will you lay as you weep? Caught up so intensely in time for you then to be blind. The minuscule mysteries that we dwell do not serve us assistance from the strings of hell. Although the umbilical cord that pulls you back is the act of prayer, the act of which submerges your soul into peace. Prayer is what brings you to the present, allowing you to swallow the past and entrust the future. Prayer is what heals your lungs when they are desperate for air, after crying out blood that wells in your being. Prayer, where you realize at the end of the day, it is you alone who will stand before your Lord and answer. Because if you cannot fulfill the promise that you gave to your Lord when sent down to this dunya, then what purpose are you to achieve in the vines of time? Salawat. Okay, now we will be commencing the short segment. We will have 6 groups, 3 on the women's side and 3 on the women's and men's side. And in those groups, we will have one member of the Barakah team that you can ask questions to, because you'll be given an unknown person, which will be an imam. So yeah, if the Barakah team can separate you guys, and we'll just begin. Salawat.
Can we please have a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad? Just a clarification, the questions are yes and no questions, so the Barakah member can only answer with yes or no. The person is either a prophet or an imam, and you got first group to guess this person wins. Okay, so good luck.